Hey guys, welcome to Bible 365. So today we are in Luke 12. We are in the second half of Luke 12. And so today we are going to be talking about inheritance. And so it's a guy who asks about his inheritance, but there's an overarching theme about inheritance here. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but what is our inheritance? Are we demanding our inheritance? Did we deserve our inheritance? And what does that look like in honoring the inheritance that we do or don't get? So stick with me as I finish up Luke 12. I will see you guys in a minute. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and this channel is here to kind of merge Bible living with Bible literacy. So, we are going to be using the New Testament this year in order to understand what it's like to live as a follower of Christ. I have a link below in the description that I have a download that will bring you to a chronological Bible reading of the New Testament. So, what I want you to do is read every day and join me and hopefully some friends as we talk about what it means to live as a kingdom builder. Let's get started. Okay, so we are in part 2 of Luke 12. And so last time we were talking about the hypocrites that were the Pharisees, right? That they weren't living in a way that was honoring of the Lord. They were not really loving in the way that they were supposed to be loving. They were following rules, but they were only following rules that really they deemed that God thought was important, and they weren't changing anything that was on the inside, and that God knew what was on the inside, right? And to not be afraid of those people, because we need to be afraid of God and we need to worry about what God says. And then we're going to follow up right away with this idea of inheritance and richness and what that means. So following up, it starts out with parable of the rich fool. And it says, someone in the crowd said to him, so they're in this big crowd, Jesus is kind of preaching and teaching, which is something he's doing pretty heavily at this point. And he's pushing against the Pharisees. So I want to stick with the fact that he's still pushing against the Pharisees. Someone in the crowd says to him, teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. But he said to him, man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter over you? And so this guy comes up. And this is always so funny because I think that this is kind of the stuff that we find with people today all the time. So this brother comes up to him and says, make my brother share money with me. Why this matters is because that probably would have been considered fair and just under the law, right? So they should have been dividing the inheritance. It was clearly understood all kind of through that time is the older brother would get a certain amount in the inheritance. The younger brother would get a different type of inheritance, right? And like the girls would get paid to go get married off, but the brothers would share in the inheritance. And it seems like in this situation, the one brother isn't sharing and not giving to the other brother. It's not the brother who gets the inheritance that comes up and talks to Jesus, but it's the one who doesn't get the inheritance. So what we would think is that Jesus would go and yell at the brother who has the inheritance, like, yo, you are not being kind, you're not honoring the Lord, you're not sharing, you're not lifting up, you're not being compassionate, right? We could say all of these things about the brother that doesn't give anything up. And yet he does none of those things. He talks to the brother that's there. And so this is kind of a lesson for us as we speak to people, but it's also a lesson for us to take on. We want what we want, when we want, and how we want it. And we can say, like, yeah, but I deserve it and I worked so hard for it, or this is the way it always was, or this is the way I understood it was supposed to be. And like, there's so much of that wrapped in us. There's so much, like just this whole idea of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because there's definitely good in us, but boy, there's so much selfishness in us. And it can be the smallest of things. The reality is, and if we just kind of talk about like open realities, we don't deserve anything. Like, I don't want to say that like being trite and being like, oh, I'm lowly and I'm nothing and I've done nothing to deserve anything. But if we're talking literally about this financial boon that this one brother got, what did the other brother do to earn half of that money? Even if he worked on the property, even if he brought money into that property, it's still not his. He's just the son, which means he wasn't the owner. He was just the son. So it's an undeserved inheritance. I'm hoping you're getting sort of where I'm linking in here, because we can talk very literally about finances. We can be super literal about it. He didn't deserve those finances. He didn't do anything to get it. Even if he was good, He's not the father. The father gets to choose where he gives the inheritance to, right? And that's really true. Um, but he believes that he deserves it. He tries to demand it from his brother, and the Lord sort of like smacks him into place. In some ways, this represents, maybe I think is the right word I'm trying to think of. This represents our promise to God, right? Like, so this represents like the Lord, if we go to Job, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. You did nothing to deserve that he created us. You did nothing to deserve uh, the fact that he sent the prophets, the fact that he protected the nation of Israel and sent them into the land of Israel, right? And protected with Joshua and gave them 12 tribes. You did nothing to earn the idea of him sending Jesus to take our sins on for us. We did nothing to get this inheritance. The Father gives as he chooses. If he had never given Jesus, right, then it's not as if we were so good and we were so heavily sticking with him and loved on him so much that he was like, you know what, you guys deserve that. He gave it to us even when we consistently turned away from him. And like, if you're, and you might not be one, you might be like, I was born a believer. I still am a believer. You might be that person. But like, I can tell you, I lived 32 years of my life. I had seen the Lord. I had heard about the Lord. I had been told things. I had seen movies. And I had actively turned from him for 32 years until one day I was just in such a bad place that I was kind of like crying out to him because I realized I needed something. And so, but even when I cried out to him, I didn't, I didn't do so much good that I earned him, right? It wasn't like I worked so hard so then he showed himself to me. He had shown himself to me the whole time. And I considered, even when I continued to turn from him, he had always shown himself to me. So he gives his inheritance, right? Whether we deserve it or not. So this is like that parallel that's kind of running over it. But Jesus is saying, who might be argue? He said, um, beware of your greed. So when we start thinking that we deserve anything, we are being greedy. We are saying like we have done something so good that we are supposed to get paid for it. And that's where we fall into a trap. And some of the nicest people among us go, well, yeah, but I worked really hard. And he's saying none of that matters. You're supposed to work hard, right? Like I want to link it, but unfortunately it's too much bad language. But there's this joke. This guy Chris Rock does this joke, and he says, but I hear guys saying all the time, like, I take care of my kids, and he's like, so what? You're so like you're showing off about a job you're supposed to do. You have a kid, you're supposed to take care of a kid, and so you can look that up on your own if you choose to. But note that there was a lot of bad language in it. But we're supposed to step up. We're supposed to work. We're supposed to love other people. We're supposed to give. Those are all things we're supposed to do. That doesn't earn us anything, and that doesn't even come close to the gift that the Lord has given us. And so beware of how much you think you have been owed. And we can go inheritance with the Lord, but we can go real simple into something like, my job didn't give me my raise. How dare they? I worked so hard for that. Or they, my parents didn't give me all of their money and they gave to the church, or they gave a car to my great nephew. Just be aware of these things, because these are things that turn your heart away. Anytime we feel like we have done something that deserves more, it creeps into our heart. So our heart then turns away from all that we've been given to think that we need more and that we're owed more, that somehow we've done something so extraordinary to be given more. And he follows up and he says, and I will say to my soul, so this is what's really important. I'm going to say to my soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. So this is this parable where so he tells this parable to kind of warn them against greed. And the parable is the guy makes a whole bunch of money And he's like, oh, I need a bigger place to go build all that. I'd like to put all my stuff. And so he says to my soul, I said to my soul, I have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease to drink and be merry. So I'm going to store up all these things and I'm just going to live the best life after that. And he said, but God says to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. So he talks to his soul and he's like, I should just eat, drink, and be merry. And God talks of his soul and he was like, your soul could be required right now. And you're worried about building and holding onto your stuff and building more onto your stuff instead of what we should be doing, which is what he follows up and he says, because he says, who will own what I prepared? And then he says to his disciples, for this reason I say to you, don't worry about your life. So, like, I know we want a 401k. I'm not telling you not to have that 401k. Again, in some ways, these are things that with the freedoms that we have that I'm going to say you're supposed to do. But don't worry about that. Don't spend all your time and energy on that. Don't not give to someone else because of that. That shouldn't be more important than showing compassion to a church or a ministry or a neighbor or a hurting family member, or right, like the list could go on and on about the people, because he's like, don't store up things for yourselves. God is going to provide for those who love him. So your needs will be met. He just said a couple of chapters ago, like, knock, ask me. I love you. I'm going to give you everything that you need. I'm not going to sell you short. I'm not going to hold against you because I love you. I'm not like a conniving, snaky trickster. I love you and I want you to have what you need and what I know and believe is best for you. But I want you to give to everyone around you. I don't want you to focus so much on holding on to that and making that your primary interest, right? Like you know where your heart is where your time, energy, and money goes. That's where you know where your heart is. So like if all of your money is sitting in a bank because you're like, I know I'm going to need it one day and I want to be able to retire at 44 so I can go and go, I don't know, on vacations for the rest of my life, right? Like you're sitting on something that God really wanted to give you and you held on to it instead of sharing with other people because you thought that that's what you needed and that's what you deserved. And so we have to just be careful of those kinds of things crawling into our heart. He says in verse 33, seek his, well, earlier than that, seek his kingdom. In 33, he says, sell your possessions and give to charity. Sell your possessions and give to charity. You can't get more literal than that. And if you're thinking to yourself, he's not talking to me. Yes, he is. He's saying you're holding on to it. You're fearful of selling it. So sell your possessions and give those things to charity. In verse 35, he's like, be dressed in readiness. This falls into being ready for him. And part of being ready for him is not being ready for this world, not being ready to sit in peace and happiness. And, I worked so hard for this amount of time and I just want to enjoy the rest of my life. That's not being ready for the Lord. That's being ready for your own joy, right? That's being ready for your own individual happiness. Be ready for the Lord. Be the expectant steward. Like, I'm not going to beat up any of my servants while I'm waiting for him. I'm going to treat everybody with dignity and kindness and respect. I'm going to give to them. And I'm not going to put myself as the most important thing in the world and demand and think I deserve the inheritance that I have done nothing to earn. And so, guys, I'm going to end on that because, like, I think following up, he just talks about the cost of discipleship. And this is what it means. Like, it means that we need to be aware of the future to come. He's coming back. He's promised us he's coming back. And so we need to live each moment of each day as if that's the truth. As if, when we talked about yesterday, he can see everything in you and in your heart and know that you sit with him. You follow him and him first. So be ready and be expectant because he could come tomorrow and we just don't know. So that's it for today. If you found this to be a blessing, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys next time in Luke 13.